Today we're going to jump into a powerful story from the Gospel of Matthew. It's about two men living among tombs, which sounds pretty intense. But what's really fascinating is how this ancient story gives us a kind of diagnosis for the human heart and presents a choice that, according to the text, has meaning for every single one of us. So let's get into it. Just let that question sink in for a second. The story we're about to explore has some pretty wild supernatural elements. But the idea here is that the real danger, the real battleground, it isn't some spooky graveyard. It's something we all carry inside of us. Okay, so let's set the scene. The story begins in this really desolate, hopeless place, which, as we'll see, is a pretty powerful picture of the heart's condition. I want you to really imagine this. Matthew chapter 8 describes it. Way out on the fringes of society, living among the tombs, were these two men. They were completely cut off, feared by everyone, totally isolated. Their home was literally a graveyard. But their situation was so much deeper than just physical isolation. The text tells us they were spiritually bound, just broken, controlled by forces they couldn't fight. There was no human solution for them. They were utterly and completely helpless. It seems like a totally permanent state of darkness, right? A hopeless situation. But then, a figure walks into this place of death, and in an instant, everything is about to change. Jesus arrives on the scene. And this is where the story kind of holds up a mirror to our own lives. The source material calls this the diagnosis of the heart. It's this idea that, a lot like these men, it's possible to be physically alive and walking around, but to be spiritually trapped, bound up, and just disconnected from God. Maybe that feeling resonates with you, that sense of being stuck, anxious, or isolated, even when you're surrounded by people.
So what happens next is, well, it's more than just a miracle. This whole encounter pulls back the curtain on the world we see and reveals a much deeper, unseen reality at play. In this moment of confrontation, the spiritual forces that were controlling the men, they cry out to Jesus, and what they say is just staggering. They ask him, "Have you come to torment us before the time?"
Whoa, let's just pause there for a second. Think about what that really means. This isn't just a scream of fear, it's an admission. They are acknowledging who Jesus is, and they seem to understand that their time is running out. This one single exchange just lays it all out, doesn't it? It reveals that there's a spiritual realm beyond what our eyes can see, that there's a real battle being waged for the human soul. And, most importantly, it shows that Jesus holds all the authority over life and death itself. And that gets to the absolute heart of the matter. According to the source, Jesus' mission wasn't just to make people behave better or clean up their act. It was something infinitely more profound. He came to resurrect what was spiritually dead. Let's go back to that strange phrase they used, before the time. This little phrase points to another huge idea in the source material, that there's a divine schedule, an appointed time for how things will unfold. And connected to this divine timeline is an absolutely profound claim. There is a second life after death. This world, it's not the end of the story. And if that's true, it changes everything. According to this text, the big question isn't if you will live again. The real question, the one that truly matters, is how will you rise? Will it be into life with God or into separation from Him? You can think of this appointed time almost like a prophetic clock. It lays out a sequence of major future events. But I want you to notice where it all begins. It begins right now. The most important time on that clock is today, with the call to prepare. And all of this brings us right back to that scene at the tombs, to the aftermath of the miracle, and to a defining choice that every single person has to face. Now, you would think that after seeing two men completely and miraculously set free, the local townspeople would be celebrating, right? But that's not what happens. Instead, they come out in a group and they ask Jesus to just leave. So why on earth would they reject the one person who brought freedom and healing? The source suggests it's for some deeply human reasons. Sometimes, true transformation is just uncomfortable. Light has a way of exposing the things in our lives we'd rather keep hidden in the dark. And ultimately, accepting a new life requires us to surrender control. And this is where we see two totally different paths laid out. There's the city's response. They saw his power, but they chose their comfort over real transformation. They asked him to go away. But then there's the heart's opportunity, to cry out for mercy, to surrender to a new way of life,
and to choose what the text calls the first resurrection.
So what is that? The source calls this new beginning the first resurrection of the heart. And it's something that is available right now. It's a spiritual transformation that begins the moment a person decides to turn away from their old life, to turn to Christ, and just surrender everything to Him. In that moment, the old dies and a brand new life begins. So when you boil it all down, this whole story, this whole framework, really presents two final outcomes. There's a life that experiences that first resurrection of the heart now and is ultimately resurrected with Christ for all eternity. Or there's a life that, just like the city, rejects His presence and ends in separation from Him.
And so we end right where we need to, with a personal question. Faced with the very same choice as those townspeople all those years ago, in the end, what will you choose? Will you ask Him to leave, or will you ask Him for life?